Madam Chair, who seconded the motion? Thank you, John.
All right, great. My name is Jeff Shaw. I'm principal at Context Architecture. Do you want us to jump into it, or do you want to do a big round of introductions for everybody?
I think you can just jump into it.
Okay, great. Well, we're super excited about this project for a couple of reasons, not the least of which it's the opportunity to design a brand new fire station that's completely and sorely needed. We've toured the existing station, seen the grounds for the chief in the briefing session. There's no question that you deserve significantly better and more improved and more safe quarters for the firefighters. But also we're very intrigued about the idea that this building will form the cornerstone or the gateway sort of building into town as the master planning of the downtown area continues. And this project is sort of the beginning of that. And the opportunity to design a building that starts that ball rolling is a really critical and important role, I think, for a designer. Not just a fire station owner, but any architect coming in and designing this building. So that's one of the main pieces of significance for us. My role on this project as principal in charge will be to lead the overall direction of the project, as well as to maintain our relationship with the town. I bring a significant amount of fire station design experience to the team, and I will be attending all the key meetings as well as presenting the project to the town.
Hi, I'm Chris Logan. I'm an associate at Context. I've been the project executive for this job. Like Jeff, I bring a lot of experience working and planning fire station designs, communities like this. I also have a lot of experience working on challenging sites that need to be looked at carefully to make sure that design fits in with it, as well as maintains the expectations of budgets and costs as you go forward. I'll be providing project oversight throughout the entire phases of the project. I'll be attending key meetings with Jeff and Sean. I'll be coordinating communication between yourselves, ourselves, and our consultants, making sure that everyone is on the same page and is aware of all the decisions that are being made. And I will, as I said, provide a lot of experience of working on projects just like this to the team.
Good evening, my name is Sean Coveney. I'm a project manager at Context Architecture. I'll be the primary point of contact for the project, managing the in-house team, as well as coordinating with the consultant teams. I'll be present at every meeting, a key contributor to every phase of the project, including schematic design, design development, CDs, bidding, CA, all that.
And I'm Steve Powers. I'm the Director of Civil Engineering for San Diego's Consultants. I've got almost 30 years of experience. I have several years of experience in fire stations. This is some challenges for the site that we'll talk about a little bit, but overall it's a great location. I look forward to hopefully being a part of the team.
And he's a next door neighbor.
And I live in Newport, so.
In addition to the four of us, we have a full team of consultants who we've worked with before on exactly this type of project. So it's very experienced in fire station design and engineering. Excited to work with them. As you've seen in our proposal, we have a lot of fire station experience, both in the planning, programming, and design of fire stations. But the primary purpose of this slide is to show you that we don't come with a specific style that we want to sell to you. We are purposely designing a building that will fit within the town of Northborough and set that tone that you want for the image. And the images here show different communities of all different sizes, urban versus rural, and the different looks of all the stations that we've done. We really try to root our designs in the context that we find. We're going to show you a few different examples that get at a couple of themes for your project, starting with the Andover Ballardvale station. This is a substation. It's built in the Ballardvale Historic District in Andover. And we had an extensive amount of public outreach for this project, over 50 public information sessions, historic district hearings, design review committee meetings, a whole host and gamut of public input. And that was because it was in a historic district. There was a lot of interest in what this was going to ultimately look like. The design of the building was very crucial, obviously, to the residents in the historic district, but also to the town as a whole and all of these committees. You can see some of the historic images here. The older one in the upper left, the original design, it's a very small little structure. But over time, this, as the fire service has grown, we now need a lot more space. So our main task and our main challenge was to design a new building that could house a modern fire station with all of the health and safety needs, as well as the firefighting needs, with now 3 bays for apparatus on a site that's adjacent to this site. And we worked very successfully with the historic district and the design review committee ultimately to collaborate on this design. We actually did a few charrette sessions to come up with a design like this. And purposely was broken apart into smaller masses to help describe how a building like this might have gotten amalgamated together over time, but to help break that down and the massing down so that it fit better in the neighborhood. The community absolutely loved it. It was fully successful at town meeting, getting all the funding and votes for the project, as well as through all of the committee hearings, and ultimately very accepted in the neighborhood. It does include a training room for the department, which they were lacking for space, but that training room is also doubling as a community, or in this case, a neighborhood meeting room.
For the town of Westford, we were hired to design a new fire headquarters, replacing the headquarters that was in the central town. This is by 495 on Boston Road. The direction given to us is that really wanted this to become the gateway to the town of Westford as you approach it from 495. But they also wanted it to recall some of the historic structures in town, the old mill buildings, not too far from the center. So we designed a building on an old apple orchard. It was a challenging site, very similar to the site you presently have, where it starts low at the road and it starts climbing higher and higher at the very end. We're the second architects in this job. The first architect was hired to do the study and conceptual cost estimating, and the pricing was coming in too high that they decided they need to take a break and re-advertise the project. And with the interest of maintaining the same program, but bringing it within budget, which we were able to do by creatively contouring the site in the back, by doing some creative landscaping with some more trees and shrubbery to eliminate retaining walls, and to build a little berm on the west side of the site to hide some of the dirt that we removed for the station. We also had the challenge of a lot of ledge on the site. We knew there was some ledge, but as we started digging deeper and deeper, I think Westford is all ledge. So we were able to chop it, grind it, and actually create a new base for the building using that ledge, the stone on site. So it became a very stable base to build the building on. And that actually saved a fair amount of money as we progressed into design. The station is 20,000 square feet. It's a career station. Similar to the Andover station, it has a community room in the front, first floor, that can be used by town departments, the fire department, as well as community as residents in the evenings when it's available. It's a 5-bay drive-through facility, so part of our challenge with the site is making sure there's adequate driving area on the backside, as well as a very generous apron on the front. It's a career station, so the second level of this building are all the residential quarters of the fire department, with very quick access to the apparatus fire pole and a direct stair. So it's really, we picked this up because it's so similar, we felt, to the program that you're looking at, the type of site you're looking at. The lessons we learned here we could easily apply and conform more to what you're doing in the program.
Town of Illinois hired us in fall 2020 to construct and design their new fire station headquarters. The current fire department operates as a mostly on-call staff, and they saw this building as the ability to transition to a career staff as to address all the needs of their growing community. This is another gateway building. The project is built on a corner lot along a main street that guides you from a highway down to the downtown area, similar to this particular project. The site also had to go through a bunch of site remediation and improvements, including knocking down an existing defunct school, as well as lowering the site down to an elevation that was appropriate for emergency response. So during design, the design team addressed and identified a bunch of ledge that during construction we had to deal with via blasting and hammering that brought that site down to appropriate height. This is a 5-bay apparatus bay, as you can see here in the diagram on the top left. It's a drive-through site, as it is on the corner, and it has an EMS bay that services the back of the site. You can also see here in one of these construction photos that they opted to go with some radiant heating in the apparatus bay. They also have some extensive ice melt in the apron that helps deal with all the inclement weather we're seeing in this area. As part of this project, we wanted to share with you 2 project schedules. The first project schedule will deal with how we're looking at task 1 and 2 to get us to a Springtown meeting in 2024. The second schedule is going to look at the same first 2 tasks. However, what we're going to talk about is after the schematic design phase and design development phase, looking at what we think would be worthwhile to look into is a construction document phase, and then a bidding phase will likely see the complete project cost by a special town meeting in fall of 2024. So what we wanted to do with these 2 schedules was basically answer what was identified in the RFQ by answering, how we're going to deal with tasks 1 and 2 via phase 1, but also looking at task 3 in phase 2 and being a little bit more responsible and showing those costs and getting a better idea of what the final project cost would be for the town.
Context brings a high level of standard to all of our buildings. And as Jeff pointed out, our buildings are not a particular style that we apply to a site. We actually tailor our buildings to the community in which they're built. But what I want to point out here is that this level of standard of service continues all the way through all phases of the project. The very initial stages are critical because that creates a strong foundation. We collect a lot of data. We interview the key individuals. We work closely with the fire department. And that, is pulled together and assembled into a very strong space needs that's vetted numerous times. That has information in it as far as square footages, what the spaces contain, and the adjacencies that are important. It also begins to set up degrees of priorities, and if we have to talk about phasing, we bring that into the conversation as well. This all leads into some of the more specific parts of the design that we believe are also important to bring up in the early stages, one of which is energy conservation and efficiency. We'll be looking at, along with our consultants, we'll be presenting to you and looking at different types of systems that could be used that would be well suited to your type of building. It's a 24/7 operation, so that really sets the standard for the type of systems that might be best. We have a lot of experience over the last number of years working with different programs, passive house, obtaining a net zero or carbon neutral facility. These are very important to our firm as a philosophy, so we apply them to our buildings, and we actually encourage having workshops or educational sessions with the building committee and the larger community, just talking about how these can be rolled into the early stages of the design and actually brought to fruition during later stages. And part of the pricing set, because that's important too, to include those in our initial pricing documents. All of this, brings us into how important it is to create a nice, safe, healthy environment for the firefighters and the administration. Jeff will talk about that a little in the future. Budgets are important and schedules are important. We talk about that at every single meeting. We have a cost estimator we work with for years. He knows how we operate. We know how, questions he asks. We believe early on creating cost per square foot based upon data that is real life data from projects that have been built, and we'll be presenting a concept of what each of our options might be running per square foot, which gives you an idea of what the cost of this will be, because we feel it's very important to make sure that we are on the same page as you are as we develop these designs and go forward. And at the end of all of this costing, we'll be doing a reconciliation to create one cost estimate for the chosen scheme.
I want to talk about health and safety just for a little bit. It's part of all of our fire station designs and has been for quite some time. There's 2 particular aspects to this. We are designing fire stations around zoning. May be familiar to some of you. Due to the science and research that's gone into firefighting and the healthiness of firefighters. You've probably heard of cancer rates in firefighting. It's known that particulates within fire stations can cause bad outcomes for firefighters. So designing a building purposely to keep those areas that are the most harmful away from the places that the firefighters spend most of their time. The administration and living quarters of the building is important from an architect's perspective, so we focus on this heavily. This diagram here pretty clearly shows red being the most particulate heavy zones, hot zones, apparatus bay, gear storage, and then the green areas being cool zones, cold zones that have living quarters and administrative offices. So we're going to also be looking at the transition zones between them to make sure they're properly designed. And we have a number of different strategies to deal with this, including HVAC, pressurization. But in particular, the second aspect of the design of fire stations, I want to focus on the decontamination area. Particularly, we want to focus in the middle area there, where we go through a bulk decontamination of gear, bulker gear as well as equipment, spray down areas, that's where your washers and dryers are. And then we go out of that into an area that's personnel decontamination. So we've got showers as well as clean clothes lockers. And then it's really important that you exit that into the clean area of the building, not back out into the hot zone. So real clear sequence, very easy to do in new fire stations, very hard to do in existing buildings. But it's something that we really take a lot of pride in making sure we get right for every single station that we do. Another thing we focus a lot on during our design process is the community aspects of the building, or as getting the information out to the community is a better way to put it. And I led the presentation of the Andover station, the illustration. We, in our practice, do a lot of community outreach, public information sessions as needed in a project in order to make sure the facts are available to people, that they understand what this project is about, the need for it, as well as why does it cost as much as it does, what's the factors that go into this, why does the fire station need to be a certain way. It's been a really successful approach in the past, and we'll be looking to have great discussions with you about the level of integration of the public into the process.
One of the more interesting aspects of this project is the proposed site here in the downtown area. As you can see here, we're identifying the existing headquarters, the proposed site, as well as the downtown area. And we feel that this is another one of those gateway buildings that is along Route 20 and leads you into the downtown. It's also interesting because, as we talked about earlier, we see this as one of the first few projects is re-imaging and reimagining and redeveloping the downtown. Steve's going to talk a little bit about the site features.
So the site, it's a 3.5 acre site. It's been previously developed. We'd be looking to occupy a big part of the existing development, but also to fit the program, we would need to cut back a little bit into the hill. So that's one of the site constraints. We've worked on a number of sites. I've been doing earthwork calculations my entire life. So what is the best balance of cutting into the property, limiting the amount of trees, and earthwork that's being done with balance of the potential smaller retaining walls? How does that fit into the budget? Doing is minimal earthwork and as minimal building of that in order to accommodate what we'd be looking for a schematic and then a site plan, a site layout. The other constraint on the property is obviously this is a Route 20, it's a Mass DOT property. A couple things that we would have to take into account is really the access, making sure there's safe access for the fire department in and out, as well as the personnel and staff. Emergency calls obviously is the primary reason we're here. So we would be looking at coordinating relatively early with the town, obviously the fire department too, to figure out what is the best way and the safest way to access in and out of the property. One of the challenges that we want to look into is that bend that goes to the left to make sure that there is a proper site stopping distance. Whether or not that involves a traffic signal will probably have to be discussed with Mass DOT. So we'd be looking at access permits, utility permit for connecting into the Route 20, as well as a potential traffic signal. Other than that, relatively there's some wetlands to the north. That's a perennial stream. We're far enough away from that where we might touch on the other riparian zone a little bit. It would be a conversation with the Conservation Commission, but I think those two site constraints are really the big ones that we look to focus on and figure out what's the best way to address that.
We're also prepared to share with you 3 different site schematics or concept diagrams that we've looked at laying out the project, as well as massing diagrams to kind of imagine as how we'd like to fit the building into the surrounding context. This first option here is roughly the same layout as identified in the RFQ. It's kind of worked through in the feasibility study. However, we felt we've made some improvements and wanted to adjust the layout. Every one of these layouts, the goal here is to kind of move the building as far east on the lot and north to get it away from the sloped area in the back, so we can limit the amount of work we need to do in site improvements. Also, one thing that we did was we took this training room and we took it off the main street so we could have adequate viewing from the apparatus and apron area around the corner, as we identified as the potential issue. The massing of the building here, taking a trip down this Route 20, you'll see a lot of gable-faced houses. As we showed in that Ballardville project, one thing we felt like would go in this area is a series of gable-face masses that kind of try to respond to the architecture in the immediate area. Option B is taking that layout, flipping it on its head. What we've done is we've taken the administration and public areas and brought them closer to the downtown. We've also taken this training room and kind of played with the location. What we've done here is we've turned it facing the main street and tucked parking up in front of it. In this final option, we're calling this the compact option, recognizing that it is expensive to have a series of envelopes. So what we've done here is we've taken that training room and kind of tucked it in to the mass of the building, and recognizing that we might have to reorganize some of the interior spaces, we've taken the living quarters and locating it above the apparatus bay. There you go.
So in conclusion, we think we have the right team for this project. We have a lot of experience, particularly doing responsive fire station design in communities that need a designer to really come in and create something that's going to respond to that need. Given the fact that this building is going to be somewhat like a gateway building, we think that that is the need here, not just the fire station, but we also know how to do fire stations correctly, making sure that they're healthy and safe for firefighters, designed appropriately, with all of the training features built in. We didn't really touch on that, but happy to talk about that in questions. We are very good listeners and responsive to the communities we work in, and would be excited to work on this project with you. So with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to you and get into any questions and comments you might have.
Questions from the committee?
Sure. Thank you for the presentation. The examples of your work really live up to your name. Your abilities to put in context. So one of the things about the Northborough community is we have a lot of municipal buildings that are brick, red brick. We have 10 Main Street, the old bank. We have the new old town hall that's going to become property of the town soon. We have the existing fire station, existing town hall, and there's a strong desire in this community for that type of vocabulary to be used.
Great.
And I know you mentioned you want your buildings to have the feel of a historic fire station, firehouse. And I think those are important items for this community. The other thing I want to compliment you on is the emphasis on energy efficiency. So you may be aware of the change over to the new ACC 2021 in 10 days.
Very, very aware of it, yep.
So this is classified as a target class. I'm not sure what that's going to mean, but if you have worked extensively with LEED and net zero buildings, it's probably not much of a change of pace for you. But this is a stretch code community, and we haven't adopted the
opt-in, right?
Opt-ins.
Yeah.
So, in your estimation, this type of building, 23,000 square feet, what kind of energy efficient features would you see being required by the new energy code, and what above and beyond the minimum or the prescriptive pathway you recommend?
Sure, great question. So take you back in time when the original stretch codes came out, building codes, energy codes. For these types of projects, fire stations, public safety projects, we were really dependent on the engineers, the people that are giving us the mechanical systems particularly, to bring in all of that savings. And even though as architects we were designing what we thought were great buildings and envelopes, the energy code didn't focus so much on the envelope. It was more about other things. This particular version of the new energy code, particularly the opt-in sections of it, but even the stretch code, is really getting it down to the envelope. So it's the architect's job now. We're front and center to design a very robust, energy efficient envelope. Starts with the air sealing, making sure the building is very tight from the number of air changes per hour, and then goes into the insulation, but a little bit less on that, mostly on the air sealing. So as a firm, we have been dealing with that for, I'd say, 15, 16 years now, maybe 20 years, since the energy code's first really gotten robust. And that's something we pride ourselves in, to make sure that we're giving you a robust building for the long term. So I would say the first strategy is making sure the envelope is well detailed, tight, and energy efficient. That way we can design smaller mechanical systems. We don't have to move as much air through the building. Typically, most of our buildings have gone through, particularly with fire stations, heat pump or a VRF energy refrigerant system, which has been the most efficient way to do fire stations, particularly given the room sizes and the sort of the special needs of the residential areas, which means we're only doing minimum ventilation, code minimum ventilation, which is plenty of ventilation, but we're not over ventilating the building. So those are probably the first strategies we'd use. We are really excited to try to find a client that would like to get to net zero, actually do a net zero building. Because we're 24/7, as Chris was alluding to, it's hard to get there. It just is. So a lot of the projects we've done to try to get to net zero have been net zero ready. In other words, you put enough PV power, they'll get there because they're all electric buildings, but they still have a fairly higher energy use. So I would like to get to a point where we are designing the interiors of the building and segregating out the apparatus bay. That's the next, I think, iteration in design of fire stations, because there's a synergy between the health and safety aspects and the energy aspects. If you consider the garage as this giant space we have to condition, what if we separated that with the interior wall that has that air barrier? But that's not only helping us from an energy standpoint, it's also helping us from health and safety, because the air barrier is separating all the bad stuff that we want to keep out of that conditioned space. So that's something we've been looking at a number of different stations now, implementing that. So a couple of non-sort of traditional answers. I'm not going to say like we'll just get a whole bunch of rebates and incentives. We'll try to do all those things too. But that's, I'd first tack it there, and then particularly, the design of the building, a compact building is better than one that's going to sprawl out all over the place.
We also, our engineers, and we have an engineering consultant that we use in the early stages. So we do develop a bunch of energy models for the different systems that we're looking at. Part of that, what we have to do for that to make it a really effective tool is to jumpstart the detailing of how we're going to work on the walls, exterior walls, and ceilings, and as Jeff indicated, the demising wall between the apparatus and the rest of the station. And all that data is put together and put into this sort of numberage model, and that produces information as to how efficient some of these systems are. And that would be part of the discussion that we'd be having with you when we're initially coming and talking about different ways to integrate different types of systems in the building, which ones work best for you. Because the 24/7 building is really difficult to get to net zero, but we can get very close to it given that type of research and development.
So you list AKF and Sony as two energy consulting companies. You use them both on each project, or?
They do different things. So AKF typically will use them. They're a mechanical engineering and energy modeling company, and so we'll use them mostly on the energy modeling side. They can do full spectrum energy modeling. Colleen Soden really focuses on sustainability, LEED programs, things like that. So if the town was interested in pushing towards LEED or something close to LEED, we'd bring her in and her capabilities. She's great at that particular task.
And AKF also has a division that looks at PV design and how the building could be outfitted for PV design. Those calculations on what we would gain given the amount of area that we could use for PV and the orientation of PV.
Thank
So
you.
I just want to build on this question. I'm still not clear what AKF is doing, because GTD would be doing energy modeling as well.
Yeah,
right?
so
where
I just want to
are we paying
explain,
for two energy models?
AKF, we're only using them for their energy modeling capabilities.
Right.
And they would go beyond, there's different levels of energy modeling. That's the best way to put it. So if we wanted just the basic life cycle cost analysis, GGD is fully capable of doing that in-house. They're a mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection engineering firm. If we wanted to do something more advanced than that, we bring on AKF, which can do more advanced energy modeling, including all the models for the LEED calculations and things like that. And they would go beyond the life cycle cost. Some of our projects use that, many of our projects don't. So it's really just a matter of how far do we want to push it and what's the right choices for your
That's the
your town.
discussion we have,
Yeah.
really with you. Because AKF will kick in after GDD does their life cycle cost analysis, and they take that data and they start doing
I would say like a good way to put it is we are talking with AKF and a couple of other energy models now about the new opt-in stretch energy codes and their impact on a 24/7 facility, because that type of calculations you have to do for those things are vastly different than what we're doing for the life cycle cost analysis, which
So
is
we
what
have lights on 24/7, we have deliver, it's different.
yeah, but in terms of the code compliance aspect of it, we need to make sure that this meets that new code, and that's really where we would want AKF to bring their skills to bear.
But you guys are responsible for the envelope aspect of it.
Correct.
You don't have an envelope. You don't need an envelope consultant, basically.
We don't need an envelope consultant. We have used them in the past when clients have really asked for that, particularly if we want to do envelope commissioning.
Right.
We've done that. So
We're not the lead. Can I?
Oh, no, you-
Yeah. So, as Tom said, you do respond to the context of, a lot of the towns that you're working with. But thinking about this as a gateway building and recognizing that the town wants something that looks like a New England town, can you talk about ways that you can do that with architectural language that's not residential? So it
Mhm.
still has that historic New England town. I mean, there are countless examples of, as you pointed out, brick fire stations in the Commonwealth and towns that are arguably more New England than we are at the moment. So can you talk some about that?
yeah,
So that it doesn't look like a house.
And maintain functionality.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the big,
Yeah.
do we want it pretty, or do we want it functional, or can we do both?
you can do both. I would say, I'm going to let the other guys answer as well. I would say that our main task as the architects for these types of facilities, not just yours, but all of them, is to make sure that even if it looks residential-like or adjacent, it still maintains a character as a public building. It's really important for us that these look like public architecture, not just you build a house and then you just supersized it, because these are not small buildings. The floor to floor might be 13 feet. That's nowhere close to somebody's house. So it's going to be a bigger building. But we also want it to take on a character in the town that it fits as a municipal building. People understand it as, okay, that is something that's the community's building, not just a lookalike to a house. So in terms of design strategies, we have been successful using gabled roofs and still making it appear that way. It has to do a lot with scale and how you manipulate the scale for window sizes, architectural elements on the building, even the sides. Even if we use lap siding, it's the scale of the siding that we're using, the scale of the corner boards. If you look at some public architecture that is built with residential materials, you'll see that that scale is what is giving it that definition and that character. I would say those are where we start. You guys want to weigh in?
I was going to jump in and talk about scale, materiality, proportion, all those features. Talking about brick, that's selecting materiality to go forward with. So if you're going to go ahead with that, there aren't many in this particular area residential houses that are brick. If they are, they're larger on that main street that we identified. So in our massing model, what we try to do is replicate that form. So if you go from brick to then the form, and you can talk about scale and proportion. You know, there's very different ways you can go through it. I don't think there's one way that we say, hey, this is how we're going to solve your project here. What we want to do is come to you with a series of designs that lead you either down a road that looks and experiments with materiality, or it goes down a road that looks strictly at form, and how do you develop that form, whether it's a single gable, going away from the gable to totally, and then from their scale. You know, one of the things that we tried to show with this is, you know, highlighting a hierarchy of spaces. A little bit odd here, because on the left here, we're just trying to figure out a way to kind of conceal a 6-bay apparatus bay behind the guise of that form down the road of looking at gable houses in the area. So if you're saying like you're confused with my explanation.
I'm not confused, I guess maybe I didn't ask my question well. I'm asking, how can you think about a historic building beyond a domestic form, beyond a residential geometry?
Gotcha.
Because I'm hearing you talk about just blowing up the scale of still a residential geometry.
No,
I think we're trying to say,
And also
how do you
the
relate?
Andover project as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Andover project clearly was, you know, it was trying to fit into a particular residential neighborhood, and it really needed that. There was no way it was going to, in fact, we actually tried an option that was a brick building with some flat roofs and things, and it was completely foreign to that neighborhood. This is, you know, I call it downtown. It doesn't need to look like it's just plucked out of a residential neighborhood and dropped on the site. I would say, to pick up on Sean's point, we're bringing out form mostly because, you know, roof forms, in particular sizes of boxes of buildings, are familiar to people. They mostly associate it with houses, but we're not trying to build a house. We're just trying to build a building that looks like it fits into the town in a good way. And so I think what we'll be showing you is options that include a mix of different roof styles. Like for instance, in this one here, the apparatus, you know, in Southborough, we did a public safety building. It's almost like that form-wise, but it has an apparatus bay winging off the side. That apparatus bay has a flat roof, and we have a built-up cornice line on it, but the cornice line's flat. And then the main entrance of the building, there's a couple of series of gables and some roof forms, and it's sort of distinguished as a building, but you would never pass for a house in its brick building. In this particular context, you know, if you did the apparatus room here, talking to function, sometimes a little bit leery about doing a slope roof like that in the middle with fire apparatus bays, because you get snow and ice that build up there and want to shoot down and have a problem on the apparatus base. So one of the conversations we'd have, if this was the design direction we started going, is, okay, what do we do about that? How do we solve that problem, or do we go away from that and maybe connect it with a flat roof connector between the two gabled end forms? But ultimately, the overall look is not of a house, it's of a public building that has a certain massing and a certain scale and size, and the materials are giving it that significance. And I guess that's where we were trying to go. We weren't trying to say, let's take a house and see how we can turn it into something. It was, how do citizens, people in the community, relate to the building?
The other thing that we also wanted to do, and I kind of just took the layout that was proposed in the RFQ, and the challenge I took was, how do I repropose a building? Because if you look at what's proposed in the RFQ, it looks drastically different than theirs. So that was me, the interesting part was, here's what you have, let's take the same plan and reimagine it in a 3D form. It doesn't have to be gable form. It was simply because we didn't have time to, you know, investigate materiality into a massing model. But we are very intrigued by that task because we've done it many different times, and each time it's a journey, it's a process, and it's an enjoyment to get to the end and have everyone respond to that.
I will say, looking at the town buildings that you do have, it spans a wide gamut.
You think?
When you talk about the context
A
of
wide
responding
gamut.
to the
And I'm wondering where
context,
everybody
that's
falls
how-
on that spectrum. I bet you there's a bunch of different answers to that.
But there are over 25 temple front buildings on Main Street.
Right.
Main Street. So picking up on that is appropriate, but like Diane is saying, we don't necessarily want it to look residential.
Of course.
I think using, really thinking about how you're going to use materials as you define the building form is important. If you look at most municipal buildings, whether they're traditional or contemporary, there's generally an element of banding of different types of materials that should go up that you don't necessarily see in residential architecture. And you can say historically, the thicker, the more elaborate materials on the base level, then it should go up more refined. Maybe the window space will get smaller, and it sort of lends to a nice composition. That's something that we started doing in the early stages. You'll see some of that in our early designs, because we really feel as though we do that for a couple of reasons. One, aesthetically, it has a nice balance to it. It introduces texture in a way that it's a real textural element of the building, rather than just being a facade treatment. And two, it also lends itself to being an anchored building that has sturdy materials at the base, which is generally the part of the building that takes the most wear on a regular basis. And as you go up, the materials are a little bit more refined and a little bit more detailed. So that's something that we look at a lot as we design these buildings.
If the chair doesn't mind, I'm going to jump in real quick because I know we're at the end of our time. We have someone who's waiting. You talked about the hot, warm, and cold zones, which is critical to me as a fire chief. I already have enough guys that have been sick. I've had guys who have had cancer, who've gone through it. I've lost friends. Do you have, and you talked about the demising wall. Are you also looking at pressurization?
Yes.
Okay.
100%. Yep.
But I didn't hear you mention that. That's why I was following up with it. So we can keep the nasty stuff away from the good stuff. And
It's hard to get all the words in there, but like it's all part of the design. There's more things we can talk about in terms of how we could, the types of ways we can deal with firefighter use of the building when it comes to the health and safety.
individual bathrooms.
Yes.
Individual,
Right. Typically, we're one person to a dorm room, except in an emergency. We're doing single-user showers. For a variety of reasons, not the least being gender ratio. We don't know what the building's going to make up and the department's going to be in the future. It gives you a lot of flexibility there. So,
As you get deeper and deeper into the building, you go through a series of positive pressured spaces that are blowing the air back into the apparatus.
I assumed it was, but I just wanted to ask just to
good question.
make sure.
Last question, Madam Chair. You've got an impressive portfolio of considerable experience in this space. Having looked at our requirements, what do you consider the top 3 critical success factors for this project in your perspective?
Well, we brought the civil engineer, sorry Steve, you didn't get to say much, but we thought the site was the most important feature, and we mentioned a couple times that curve of the road. We really do think that's important for a long-term viability of this
There's
site.
a line of sight issue there. without
Line of
question.
sight, yep, no question. We're pretty confident that we can look at the program, suggest maybe a few improvements, and we're good to go on that and just get right into the design. And I think, we've spent most of the time talking about design is the big one. What is this going to look like? How's it going to fit in? What's the architecture? What's going to give it the gravitas that it needs to stand on its own?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome. I appreciate it. Thank you for all your questions.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for your time.
Dr. Sean, when that timetable getting back, when it starts tonight?
Yeah, notification should be coming by the end of the week, I would think.
Wow, great.
On rankings. If the committee can deliberate and make a decision this evening.
Excellent. I appreciate that.
It's not that I'm in a hurry to get a fire station. I don't think this is fire station.
We believe on
Yeah, we're going to leave this cable. This is yours here, so for the next group.
All right, thank you.
And the thumb drive?
Thank you for this also. Thank you for this.
Oh, you're welcome. And we have a thumb drive too for you in case you want the
Yeah, that would be great, yeah.
digital version of
Yeah,
it.
we're just- you guys-
I'll grab it. Hold on.
I'll grab it. We got centrally located.
Yeah. So we'll see.
I'll find it.
It's around somewhere.
I get it. Don't worry about it. Do you want any of the
It's back in
extras?
my office.
We have extras here if you want them. Do you want any of these? We can take
You
them
got
out.
a copy of that?
I have
This is okay.
Okay.
We'll grab these from
Yeah,
you.
he's looking for it over there.
Thank you. Sure. Thanks for coming in, of course. Nice meeting you all.
some other proposals we went through, and we as a staff, ultimately determined who we would bring back.
Yeah, and it wasn't a hard decision.
Amazing.
No. And these guys go for sure.
I think all three.
Yeah. No, I thought the question was good about what worries you about this project? You know, what are your major concerns? Yeah, those are just kind of a couple.
Forget where yours is. It's over here, right? The door it is.
I think we sent these to, I know that that's some.
We get some.
Yeah. Yes. Go Jumbos. I was international relations and economics at Tufts. And yeah, and then it's a long story. I was in high school in Arkansas. Not my mother was pretty
I mean, it also says it took to complete this survey. It didn't really. And this was Brian actually. Yeah, I think.
We're all ready, we're all ready. Yep, and we'll make sure we're in overtime, we'll make sure you get your half hour.
Okay. Hey, bye guys. Look how I talked to you. Thank you very much for inviting us for HKT Architects. I'm Janet Slamenda, I'm principal of HKT Architects. And
I'm Amy Dunlap. I'm also a principal at HKT.
And I'm Lance Hill. I'm with Power Corporation Civil Engineering.
Dominic Pinello, principal and HVAC engineer at GGD Consulting Engineers.
so I'm going to make, oops, hold on. That would be nice if I actually put the other piece
Squeeze
in.
that button while you're
Yeah, put the other one in there. Okay, let's see if this works now. There it goes. Why HKT Architects? I can tell you that we have a lot of fire station design expertise. We've been doing public architecture for more than 47 years, all kinds of public work for communities throughout Massachusetts, town halls, DPWs, fire stations, police stations, public safety, you name it, we've done it. The people in our firm and the people that are our consultants are people that we work with all the time, people we have a lot of trust in, people that work with us to create a good design for our clients. We're very creative people, and our process will lead to the best solution to your design problem. These are our team members, PAR Corporation represented here tonight, GGD Consultant represented, and then our landscape architect, Ray Dunnitz, Tortora Consulting, Cost Consultant, AKF Group for Code, and Cato & Associates for specifications. Working together to realize your community vision. I know this is really important for you. We've been listening to your YouTube videos and reading everything we can, doing our due diligence. We know this is really important for you. And it's really important for us. It's all about the process, the partnership we build with you, the communications that we work together to form, and how we collaborate together, really important. We're going to help you define what is a meaningful project for Northborough based on how you articulate your vision. We're going to understand the essence of the vision and translate that into a building, and we're going to listen to you and thoughtfully respond to every comment you make, and every comment your community makes. It's really important that we hear from everyone. We, as a team, challenge one another. We do not work in, this person A gets done and person B gets done in the C. We work together as a team. Lance and Dom and us will be working together from the get-go to get the best building, because you never know what is going to be the linchpin piece that makes the decision where the building goes on the site, how the building is formed, et cetera. So we do work that way. We're very proactive, and we're also looking for constraints, and we look for opportunities to mind those constraints, because every site has a constraint. We just sat at Dunkin' Donuts and we looked up at the site, and that's a constraint. So we.
Can we get a line pumped?
I know, I heard about that.
I'm just curious.
I already mentioned it to our civil engineer and see if we can bring them.
We'll bring our own premature herd.
We also understand that you're doing a revitalization zone. We know there's a meeting tonight happening,
yeah.
And so that's really important. This is going to be the first project, perhaps, in that zone. At the far end of its zone, it's an important building for the town, and so we believe that just like you're outreaching on this project before, you're going to be outreaching on this project community and doing it really early to build support among your community. So you need those public and individual meetings to get started and find out what people are interested in, what they're concerned about, what the issues are. It's informing and educating, so when you get to town meetings, people are not saying, I never heard of this project, and that's what you do not want to hear. So we do a couple things. We've done public visioning sessions and public charrettes, which we find fun and interesting to do with communities. If you're up for something like that, we'd love to do something like that. Setting the tone. This is a unique building. Its fire apparatus bay is not small. It has really big height issues, and how you break down those volumes and how it relates to smaller properties along that whole line of major roadway through your town is important, and have people understand that. So we like to be able to explain to people, what is a fire department? What do they do? Why is this thing so big? Why, and all that stuff. We discuss the process, and then coordinating the master planning and revitalization efforts to make sure that that's happening, and they're talking about things like form and materiality and signage and streetscapes, and that we're all talking together on projects. So we think that's really, really important. And then when we're doing public buildings, we always look at what you have. We don't even have any of your schools on here, but these are public buildings and the neighboring buildings along the street. We review your local architecture, buildings in the public domain, buildings that reflect the neighborhood, what is the development along the downtown areas. We refine those elements of the architecture, and then we provide the best aesthetics. The reason we picked the two bottom pictures is because of the scale of the building on the left with the porch and the dormers and things like that. How can that relate to a fire station? And then the building the picture on the right is because you've got those three styles of architecture right jammed next to each other. This is what your town looks like along that structure. So we thought those were not just the standalone buildings that define your towns, but the other architecture that's along the way. I'm going to turn this over to Lance.
So I'm with Power Engineering. We handle the civil engineering components of the projects that we've been lucky enough to work with HKT on for many, many years. One of the advantages that we have is that we are comprehensive engineering with civil, structural, environmental, geotech, traffic, and permitting. We do all of that in-house, so we've been doing all of these services with HKT for many years. The more consultants you have on a job, oftentimes the more constructability issues you have when you get into the actual construction itself. So this is a value add that we provide to the HKT team to really consolidate those services together. How we typically evaluate sites when we move into them, excuse me, we evaluate them from an engineering standpoint, of course, best management practices, but we also look at them from operational issues and maintenance issues. How is it going to be maintained as you move along? I was formerly a DPW chief that handled a lot of the maintenance on these types of buildings. Not only the maintenance on the buildings and the surrounding areas, but also the traffic signal. You know, how's that going to work? You know, I saw a lot of issues when, you know, you guys are preparing for a fire going out. The traffic signals usually not the first thing on your mind. So understanding how that operates, is it operational, and how is that going to impact the safety of you folks and also the town. And the last thing that I wanted to point out is future planning. You know, it's really important on these sites. You know, you only get this one time, and you want to be able to plan for the future and modularity of the building itself, and also, you know, what might come down the line on the rest of the property there. You know, when we're looking at these designs, we don't like to pigeonhole you into something and preclude future development on there, unless that's something that you've already identified to say, no more development's ever going to happen back here. This particular site is pretty interesting, as you know. The big hill behind there is going to probably present some groundwater and ledge issues. We can already see that up front. In addition, the big hill with the vegetation on it might be a little tough for solar installation, we think. You know, so evaluating that green design and how that's going to work, you know, we're going to really take a look at that. You know, maybe geothermal is a better approach to take at this particular location. But one thing I did want to say is traffic. Mass DOT can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes. If anybody's ever worked with Mass DOT, just in terms of length of the project, we come together at the very beginning of the project. We really put a permit strategy in place together so that we can facilitate not only the design, but also the permitting to make sure that it goes through. We've put a lot of signals on these fire stations on Mass DOT roads, so we have a pretty good handle on, you know, what's required for there. And the last thing, how the preemption is going to be attacked with some of the local intersections. You know, we know that you have an emergency signal out just on Church Street now, and how is that all going to interact with this site being only about 700 feet away? So I'm going to turn it over to Amy next.
Thank you. So while Lance is getting going on the site evaluation phase, we're going to dive into confirming the program. We know that you did do programming in the last study, but it's been a few years. We think it's a good time to confirm what was done, see if there are any changes in there. And for us, programming is really important for us to really get a good, solid understanding of your operations. We've done fire stations all over the state. They all have very similar parts and pieces, but how it's all arranged to work with your operations tends to be unique from station to station, we find. Everybody operates a little bit differently, and if we can really understand your operations, understand your workflows and your processes, that's when we can really create architecture that's responsive to your unique operations and something that's really going to work for you. So that's really what our goal is going to be in the programming phase. And at the same time, we're going to start to talk to you about clean station design. We've been having lots of conversations with departments about this recently. We have an example we'll show you, something that we've done recently with another department. But it means a little bit different to different people. It's all about the contaminants for sure, and making sure the contaminants don't filter through the building, but they're also firefighter health benefits and well-being benefits, getting natural light in, getting healthy materials in, getting access to views. It's a very stressful job, making sure that you have visual breaks and places where you can decompress, and all that's really important, and things that are going to get wrapped into the clean station design element. So we'll be looking at the best practices to make sure that we can keep those carcinogens away from the living quarters, away from the working or the administrative quarters within the fire station. We're going to be working with HVAC engineers to make sure that we have the pressurization that helps that. And as I say, it's also operational, and we need to make sure that the operations for your department and how you move through the spaces matches the architecture that we're creating, so that we can make sure that all these systems that we put in place work. This is an example of a project that we just finished recently. This is the Ashland Public Safety Building, and we worked really hard with them on these elements of clean design. And you can see it through all the bullet points. It's a combination of both the architecture and the operations, making sure you wear PPE on the site, making sure that the trucks are always hooked up to the Plymevent system, that you do vehicle checks outside as much as possible. So there are operational components as well as the architecture. The red are the hot zones, the green are the cold zones, and the yellow are the transition zones. And you can see from the blow-up plan below here that we really spent a lot of time working with them to figure out how they were going to flow through these spaces when they came back from a call, when they had contaminated equipment. Where were they going to go first? Where were they going to decontaminate their bodies, their equipment, and how were they eventually going to get their way back up into the rest of the building? All of this is so critical, but it also, we have to make compromises. In the case of this building, we were setting building into a hill. There were certain limitations for the architecture because of what was going around. So we have to have those conversations with you about what's most critical, what can we do, what can't we do, what compromises are we going to make. I'm going to turn it over to Don to talk.
Thank you, Amy. So GGD would be the project MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection consultant. And we would work as part of an integrated design approach with HKT, which we've done a number of times and really enjoy it. One of the goals that we focus on is load reduction. Because if we could reduce the building heating and cooling loads, we could provide hopefully a smaller system that's going to come in at a lower cost. So we do that through high performance envelope design that we inform HKT on by using energy modeling. So we can study different envelope options as well as different HVAC system options. Some of the HVAC options that we look at, especially nowadays, are air source and ground source heat pump, which are electrified heating, air conditioning, and ventilation systems. We also use high efficiency lighting systems to reduce that load. So anytime you could reduce load, you could reduce equipment sizing and costs. And we want to make sure that the systems that we propose are systems that are going to be reliable and have been used, they have a good track record, highly efficient, and have good indoor air quality. So as Amy mentioned, the different hot, neutral, and cooling zones, we do that through good HVAC ventilation design and pressure control, and making sure those zones have the proper pressurization so that we're keeping any contaminants and pathogens from the apparatus bay away from the living quarters. We do that through use of the building management system as well as testing and balancing. And we still keep an eye towards energy recovery where we can in the living quarters, so we still are an energy efficient design. We use VAV and CO2 demand. But then in the apparatus bay, we have vehicle exhaust systems that are going to capture those particulates. And with that, I'll turn it back to Amy.
So sustainability is really important to our firm, and it's important to so many of our clients these days. I'll just say we've done lots of different sustainable projects with different levels. It's something that we talk to our clients about, what's important to you. We've done LEED projects, we've done net zero projects, we've done fossil fuel free, and we've done projects where we plan for the future to incorporate all these things. We'll spend some time with you during schematic design to figure out what your goals are and what's going to be possible, look at the options, look at the cost of different things, so that you have the information you need to make informed decisions about what you want to incorporate. What's most important through all of this, in our opinion, is not only being a good steward of the environment and making sure that we keep energy costs down, but making sure that it's a good environment for the people who live and work there, making sure that it's a healthy environment for them. So we'll work with you on that. We spent a little bit of time looking at imagery, knowing that that was really important to you in this downtown revitalization zone. We looked at some of the buildings, as Janet said, going up and down the street. We tried to incorporate some of the imagery that we saw into the options. These are just quick sketches. Anything is on the table at this point, but we wanted to give you an idea of all the different possibilities that are available. In this scheme, we looked at some of those structures that Janet was showing you earlier that have some of the porches. Let's see if my pointer works here. So we incorporated sort of a porch element here. There's an overhang, there's some columns that covers the entrance here. We've got pitched roofs. The apparatus bays, this is a really large scale piece here, so we broke it down into 3 pieces. We stepped them back. We put some dormers on with some light to get that nice natural northern light deep into the apparatus bays. And then for the tower, we thought that might be a nice opportunity to have a clock tower or have some sort of town seal, something to that effect in the downtown area. In this scheme, we wanted to try an option with a roof monitor. We've thought this would be a nice way to get natural light deep into the apparatus space. So we looked at an option for splitting the roof into 2 different slopes to put this roof monitor in and get the light in, and then did some playful things with the roofs and the other 2 structures here to mark the entrance, and again, another tower element for the hoses. And then another option is to do a flat roof. Flat roof structures are less expensive generally. There's good opportunity to have some green roofs in a scheme like this, good opportunity for collecting rainwater for other uses. This might be brick with some banding, some overhangs, sort of shielding the doors, protecting them a little bit from the elements. And again, these are just some options of many things that you could possibly do. Cost is something else we're going to be talking to you about early on in the project. It's been a few years since you did the study, as we said. Costs have risen dramatically during the pandemic. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone here, but in our mind, the best time to control costs is early in the design process, when we're setting that program, when we're setting the square footage of the building, when we're talking about all these different elements to bring into the design. So we're going to make sure we talk to you about that a lot early on, and then we're going to make sure that we don't prevent scope to make decisions, and make sure that we hold ourselves to it as we move forward. Jerry Tutor, our professional cost estimator on this project, is someone that we've worked with for a very long time. He's someone who has a really good handle on costs in the public sector. He works on all of our public safety projects. And we'll be getting him involved to make sure that we're on target as we move forward.
I'm just going to talk about why HKT. This is our last slide, wrapping it up. So we talked about partnering and communications and collaboration. That's what it's all about through the whole project, talking with you about all the elements of your project, from the site issues with the hill, the clean station design, which is critical, how sustainable you want the project, what's your budget, all those things. We work with you to come up with the right answers for your town. We think we have the right team. We have the expertise. We are creative people, problem solvers. If you notice any of the architecture in our projects, nothing looks the same. Every town has a different design, so we don't do cookie cutter. We're really responsible for what they want. Our references hopefully will tell you that we listen to you and respond to their goals and concerns. And we're looking for a thoughtful architectural solution for your community. And we have to make the chief happy that the building works.
That's the most important.
And it's really important. And it is. If the plan, I always say, if the plan doesn't work for the fire department, it doesn't work at all, even if everyone loves the architecture. So we always say that. And I think together we can achieve, that balance of functionality and budget and architecture. Think about it. Just some images. I know you have a nice hand pumper.
We have
we put one of those.
We have an antique as well.
An antique one we made a lobby slightly bigger with operable doors and off and on to its events. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Chief?
Just a couple. First of all, if you saw me grinning when you put the hose tower up with the clock, Captain Brillhart's been bugging me since we started this that he wants a clock on the hose tower, and he's going to be retiring probably as soon as this building's done. His job will be to wind that clock if we put a clock on the hose tower. And we put a ring around the outside, so it's red for a fire call.
We put a town seal on the third one, and then the clock.
That's neat, but I love the idea of a clock. I think that's really unique. So one of and I loved your comments about the healthy station. I think that's very critical. At least for me, it's super critical. And that you recognize it's not just the physical aspects, it's also the mental aspects. We actually created a patio out behind our current station, strictly for the place for the guys to go to so they can decompress if they need to. We have enough crappy calls. You need every now and then some place to go. Well, we don't have a place inside because everywhere you go, there's somebody else there, right? But more importantly, and you had mentioned about the looks of the building, because that is critical to many people in this community, you understand. And you mentioned about the functionality that the fire chief wants. How do you make those work together? Because as soon as you start making things pretty, they get expensive, right? And it's in my opinion, maybe not. But when we want it to look nice, I mean, maybe arched doors, and I want the bifold doors. I want the really neat doors that open sideways and a few other things. But how do you get functionality and looks and keep it not outrageously expensive?
Either one of us. You know, I mean, you know, you pick, you get the plan right, and then you figure in what else you need to do. And then you layer in the architecture. Sometimes it's materials. You know, I finished a project just recently where we thought we were going to have a masonry base and a top of another material. And at that time, it was cheaper to build a masonry. So the whole building was masonry, and they were thrilled. But so it's working with our cost estimator to do estimates along the way with us so that we know what the materials are costing and what the physical. Don't overbuild. So I don't allow you, I'm not saying you, the town to say, can't you make the space just 10 feet bigger? Because 10 feet bigger at $800 a square foot is.
Well, that would be a follow-up question. How do you avoid change orders?
Yeah, so, you know, you do a good job programming, a good job laying out the building. You don't, you know, create spaces that aren't useful. And then you work with your team. Dawn, you know, mechanical systems alone will break the bank. And then site, you know, if we looked at that site, we desperately wanted to work on the plan, but we thought, no, the plan seems right, you know, generically, but what if we build into this hillside more? What if we stacked it differently? You don't have an elevator. That means no one can go to the second floor that's not an able-bodied fireman. Not even a select board member can go. Not even the members of this group can go to the second floor without an elevator. That's the way the rules work. So, you know, we looked at things and said, but if we had this a little bigger, what could we do? So it's a process. It's all about the process.
We have to put an elevator in just because it's a public building, people access it.
So the rulings have been, you know, firefighters have to be able-bodied. So if it's only going to be accessed by the firefighters, then you don't necessarily need the elevator. But as Janet said, then you can never have the Boy Scouts take a tour of the second floor of the building. You can never have the select board. You can never have the building committee. I mean, to be perfectly honest, in all the fire stations we've done, there's only one. It was a substation, and it was a really tiny little station, and we didn't put an elevator in. But everywhere else, we always have.
I know one that was just built that has an elevator, and actually, I was surprised I found it. That's not a bad idea.
Yeah, it is. So, you know, so there's a lot of it. I don't know if I covered it. I mean, it's a process. You start and you make good decisions and you say no sometimes. You know, no, you can't do that. Or this is where, like, you know, Lance said to us, you know, if we retain this part of the wall, we'd have more flexibility with the plan. You know, and you get a better plan for the department, a more operationally sound building. We get all of those clean elements together rather than split on two sides of something. We present it to you and would say, this is working to you. So.
I just have one lot just because I know Ashland and I talked to the chief on many occasions. We're in the same fire district. I know you had some sourcing issues and you had some door issues.
Oh, yeah.
How do we avoid those?
Yeah.
Or are they avoidable, I guess is the
Yeah. I mean, the sourcing issues for the most part were pandemic related. We had some issues where it was crazy. The insulation we were going to put under the apparatus-based slab, suddenly we got into construction and no manufacturer was making that thickness anymore. No one. And so we had no choice. We had to, you know, double the thickness of the insulation because it's all that was being manufactured at that point in time. And that was, you know, some of the craziness of the pandemic. The doors is a bit of a long story. I'm sure Chief Roby has talked to you about that. And we have a tough contractor on that job. There were some personnel changes with the contractor through the project. We don't have the same person that we worked with all through the design closing out the project. So, you know, the best thing I can say is that we try to form really good relationships with the contractors that we're working on in our project, not just the owners, not just the design team, but having a good relationship with a contractor that you can work out some of these issues together, I think goes a long way to getting the building done in a harmonious.
Yeah, and I would say that the sourcing of products is changing. You know, one time it's mechanical systems you can't get, and the next it's, you know, 6 months later it's the doors, and in between it you can't get a piece of metal to create X. I mean, you know, we couldn't keep up with the source issues, you know, that would delay a project, so we don't know what's coming. We hope that things are stabilized.
So you track critical path items in your planning then?
Well, it's public bid, so we can't exactly tell them how to.
No, but if you don't get a heat pump or whatever, that's going to delay X, Y.
Oh, yes, yeah. I mean, we can talk about that. I mean, you know, that mean, mechanically, you know.
And we work with a contractor. I mean, we
Yeah.
work through the pandemic. We had how many construction projects
I
during
think 5.
ongoing during the pandemic? I think all of them were impacted in some way, shape, or form by material shortages, or labor shortages, or COVID outbreaks.
Electric panel, you couldn't get an electric panel to say there's something.
Yeah, I heard switches and panels
Yeah,
are
like,
originally
what's that
gone.
about?
Yeah, we had one job where everyone and his brother was on the phone with electric suppliers trying to track down the panel that we needed, you know.
Given your considerable experience with fire station, public safety buildings over the years, and your knowledge of what we intend to do, what do you consider the top 3 critical success factors for this project?
Top 3. I think number 1, as Janet said, is getting the plan right. And I think that, you know, it's a collaboration with the site. It's a difficult site. It reminds me a lot, and I don't know, Lance, about Ashland and what we went through to get Ashland set. And I don't know if Chief Roby shared any of this with you, but when we did the feasibility study with them, we actually thought the building would be the mirror image. Looking just at the site very quickly, we thought the apparatus space clearly needed to be in this one location. And then once we got into schematic design, and it's a very difficult site, a very steep hill at a busy intersection, we did the traffic study. We did, what was we did how many moorings and how many
75
geoprobes?
75 probes.
Yeah, I mean, we were trying to figure out what the rock profile was, and we spent, Janet and I and another designer in our office spent hours with civil engineers at PAR in our conference room looking at these rock probes and sort of figuring out how to best site the building, both laterally on the site as well as setting the floor level to minimize the amount of blasting that we were going to have to do. And then the traffic came back and said, you know what, there's only one place for the apparatus to come out. You got to flip it. And so putting all of those pieces together and working collaboratively was really key to coming up with a plan that worked operationally for them.
So I think the plan, collaboration, and the third one is community input. That's critical in this project. Very prominent part in town. You know, we know we can do. We know how to build a building. We know how to do break wall sections. We put every kind of roof and things on it. But having your community be involved from the beginning to end, I think is critical. We don't. That's why it's the very first slide in our presentation is to start day 1. You want to really get them involved because they will support you if they understand why you're doing what you're doing, and then you can explain the decision. We want you to be able to walk into the local supermarket or the library, and somebody knows you're on the committee, and they ask you a question, you have the answer. We want you to always be prepared. You know, the old 3-minute elevator speech. Yep. We want you to have that and ready to go. So I think those are the 3 things for me. You know, that are critical.
Anyone else? Just have a simple question.
No, go ahead.
John, did you do the energy modeling for the whole project in-house?
Yes, we do.
Don't you use AKF as well
Yes.
as modeling?
They do the code and
They
stuff.
do code,
They do a lot of different things, but they do codes for us. Yes.
Anything else?
So this, you mentioned this very prominent site, and there's a great deal of interest in Northborough as to the appearance. We want it to be a healthy building and energy efficient. But you mentioned the envelope as an important factor, and that to me is one of your key pieces of sustainability. You need to build a building that's going to last. We have a current building was from the 60s? 70s. So the more investment you put into your envelope, both for energy efficiency and for longevity, it's critical, and it has to look like it belongs in Northborough. So I would just emphasize those components as well as getting the right plan, working the site, making it helpful. It's got to be an appropriate piece of architecture.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, you know, as Janet said, we really pride ourselves on not having cookie cutter architecture and making sure that we get to know every community and that we put something thoughtful in the community that really fits with their aesthetic, with their vision, something that they could be proud of moving forward. I think that's really critical.
And we spend a lot of time getting that wall section right. You know, we go constantly to, I was just at a session on building the envelope right, and I came back and I was so excited because I said, okay, that's how we build it, you know, and it's really important to us. And we spent years as the energy code very much changed. It's back 20 years now, where insulation went from being inside walls to outside walls. You know, we were slugging it out, Amy and I, on that very first project, like, how do you do that? How do you build a wall like that? You know, when we have 6 inches of insulation outside the wall, you know, and how do you hang the brick off of that? How do you, we spend a lot of time getting the envelope right, so.
This last question for me is, do you have the time to do this? Was your workload okay that you're not going to be scattered all over the place running around, you're going to be able to fit us in?
No, we don't go after a project if we don't have the staff and the time to do it. We know what we can do and what we can't, and we have a whole bunch of projects just actually finishing up, including Ashland, which is just open, ribbon cutting ceremony just 2 weeks ago, and so we have the time, or we would not have gone after projects. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming to the
Okay,
next
thank you.
presentation.
Amy?
Thank you very much. Good to see everybody. Fire station.
I get ignored a lot too. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Do you guys have a copy of the presentation with you?
I copy or?
Yeah, just like
Do you have a thumb drive? I do. You want a copy on the thumb drive? You can have hard copies.
If you want to.
Just got some hard copies for you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for your time. I see you. Thank you.
Let's see. Did I remember my computer? Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. I do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Have a
very
good night.
much.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
We'll put your initials on the block.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I just didn't know where everyone would be standing. Do we want seats? Maybe. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're all set. I need to figure out how to turn this on, I suppose.
Shouldn't have said you're all set.
Huh. Let's just press those on.
You see the light is slowly coming on?
See it coming on?
I can see the light on top of the machine.
Okay. Wait, go on. We're obviously delighted to be here. Nice to be back in town. It's nice to see the project moving forward after a while. So
Yeah.
we're obviously very excited. We'd love to be able to continue and finish what we started. So. There we go. Okay, good. Well, jump in. I understand we have about 20 minutes. I may even take less than that, but we thought we'd talk a little bit about us. We know some of you, we don't know all of you, but it's a chance to kind of reintroduce ourselves. We wanted also to talk a little bit about our experience because we've actually done a number of fire stations in the last 4 or 5 years. So we wanted to kind of go over that so you understand what we've been up to. And then obviously we want to spend some time talking about your project as well. So just our firm, we've been in business now about 25 years, really focusing on public work. We really call it work for communities. And so we do a bunch of different kinds of projects that we'll talk about. But we're about 14 people right now, kind of a diverse group. Lots of our staff have been here for a long time. So we'll talk a little bit about the firm. There are 3 principals. There's myself, there's Jeff, and there's Phil O'Brien, who are we're the kind of leadership of the firm. But the people you're going to see day to day, it's really the 3 of us. I have been a practicing architect since 1978, so a long time. Really focusing on public sector work. I've started this firm about 25 years ago. But Jeff and I had worked together for a number of years before that at a prior office. So Jeff, you've been with us for...
Well, 10 years already. It's nice to see everyone, and we're thrilled to be here. Stu and I met when I was in graduate school, and we worked together for 7 or 8 years at Tepe Associates, where Stu was an associate, and then I became an associate. Stu was what we used to call one of our acorns, the folks who left and started their own practice, library folks. I stayed on, was eventually CEO, and then joined Johnson Roberts about 10 years ago as a principal. And we've got Michael Belfway, is one of our associates, is here.
Nice to meet you all, and thank you for having us. I've been with Johnson Roberts for about 9 years. Worked on this, the Northborough Fire Station, sort of the conceptual and site selection project about 4 or 5 years ago now, I guess it was, and then worked on 3 other fire stations with the office as well.
Yeah. So the 3 of us, well, obviously we already know the project because we worked on the study phase. So we're already familiar with the site, we're familiar with your program, but we'll talk about how we want to approach moving into the next phase because we expect there are going to be some things, as there always are, when things take a few years to move forward. So talk a little bit about kind of what we've been doing. As I said, our office really focuses on work for communities. So really all of our work is public work. It's all Chapter 149. We've done lots of public libraries, including this one, as you may know. We've done some private schools, higher education. We've done a number of town halls. In fact, Michael worked on fixing the facade of the town hall here. It was one of the little projects that we fixed, and that seems to be working. But we've also done a lot of public safety work, and more of that probably in recent years, probably in the last 6, 7 years or so, we've been doing more of that. So just kind of talk about, this is kind of some of the fire stations we've done. I think we've completed about 6 fire stations. We've done studies for more than that. I would say if you look at all of them, we try to, where they're new stations, we try to make them look like they belong to the communities that they serve. So we really do want to work because, all of our buildings, when we do public buildings, they really are part of the way a community sees itself. So we want to make sure that we're doing something that's appropriate for the town that we're working in. A few years ago, we were hired by the city of Boston to develop fire department design guidelines. Basically, they were interested in developing guidelines for a bunch of new projects that were coming up. They hadn't renovated or built a new station, I think it was in 30 years.
Yeah, 40 years.
And we spent about 2.5 years working with them and produced a document that's, I don't know, it's 1,000 pages or so, very detailed specs for what they expect in a new station or a renovated station. I mean, really down to all the communications, everything in there. But a focus of this was really healthy in, healthy out, because they had so many incidents of cancer with people who were with firefighters on staff. And so we worked very closely with them on that. And it's really an exciting thing to do. I have to say, it isn't often when we feel like as architects we can do something that's going to save lives. And we think that that approach certainly can do that. So that was very rewarding. So following that, some of the stations we've worked on since we've been out here is we did a new substation in Dracut, fire station number 3, brand new station. We also did a combined fire station and police station in Essex. And Essex, you can see this is the sort of business end of the fire station. Around on the street. Essex was, it's a kind of small rural community, and the site that we picked after going through a big site selection process like we did with you was a sloping site, so we were able to get the fire station on the upper level, do the police on the lower level. But this is a big station. This is 25,000 square feet. I don't remember the exact square footage, so it's about the size of what you're talking about. Big station for that neighborhood. So the concept here was to break it up into what looked like a bunch of smaller farm buildings, side them differently, treat them differently. This is actually their training room that you see in the foreground here, which is a reproduction of a barn that used to be on the site before we arrived. So we were really trying to make it fit in and look like it belonged in the community. And then just some of the examples of the interior inside of the training room, turnout gear, apparatus bay. We have done 3 projects in the city of Cambridge now, renovations of 2 historic stations, and we're just now working on a new prefabbed modular training tower in the city. The 2 existing stations, Cambridge has a lot of small substations because they're trying to cover the whole neighborhood, and there's no room in the city to consolidate anything. So these are some of their smaller stations. I would say from a healthy in, healthy out point of view, these were disasters when we started. The River Street had, the kitchen was in back of the apparatus bay, for instance. So this was really reworking everything, putting in new poles, because they still like the poles in Cambridge, redoing all the toilet rooms, really all mechanical systems.
Yeah, it started out as an interior rehab, finishes, and turned into pretty much a full scale. Not quite gut renovation, but pretty close. And having the major living quarters right above the apparatus was one of the challenges of healthy in, healthy out. So what we worked with the clamshell manufacturer, who there's only one of them for the doors at the interstitial spaces, and wrapped it with a glass storefront with a photo eye that's tied in all together. So as soon as somebody closes the storefront door from the dining day area up above, clamshell opens, the air goes from good to bad always. That's really the biggest concept of healthy in, healthy out, and solidifies and separates as good as you can the spaces between the red zone and the green zone and transportation areas, the transaction areas.
A couple of stations that we had done before that you may have seen before. This was fire station number 3 in Marston's Mills for the Centerville, Osterville, Marston Mills Fire District. This one again was going in a residential district. People were very sensitive to what it was going to look like, so we tried to do something that looked like it belonged on the Cape. So you get the corridors in yellow here, and then the apparatus bay kind of looks like a shingle style barn. People actually love the colors on this. They stop at the station all the time and ask, what's the paint color on it? And then following that one, we did another one for that fire district in Osterville. And this is their station number 2, which again is a residential area. We really tried to break it down into a series of smaller buildings so that it would fit in the context that it's located in. Okay. just to kind of talk about your project a little bit. I think we have a good start. We worked through, last time we spent a lot of time. Boy, did we look at every site in town. We looked at everything that was possible. And, ultimately settled on this site. It's a great location. It's not without some challenges. It's got some grading issues, but we were able to come up with a plan with the addition of that extra, by acquiring that extra piece of property in the back that is going to let us do drive-through bays on the facility. So I think we came up with a pretty good site plan. I think it works pretty well. I think the floor plans probably also work pretty well, but we recognize it's been 5 years. There could be some things that you might want to do a little differently. You might have thought about it for a while, decide that you want to do something a little differently. So the first thing that we want to do is really take a look at all of those kinds of planning issues. I can tell you, doing public work, we often do projects where we'll do a design. Probably what happened exactly with the library. You do a design, and it takes a while to get funding. When funding comes through, you roll it back out and look again, and you may redesign it. So I know that this building, the design that went into the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners is different than what was built, because after time goes by, we were able to go back and take a look and come up with some maybe better ways of accomplishing things. And we would expect to do the same thing with you guys. Just second floor, sort of two-floor concept. You're all familiar with these plans.
So really a proof of concept, Stu. We know it works. We know
Yeah.
the site will work.
Yeah.
Now it's time to actually design something.
Now, we spent a lot of time on the site planning, the design, site selection. We didn't spend very much time on the exterior, so we kind of needed something at the end of the project, and this is what we came up with. But we understand that the town is interested in doing something that maybe have a little more traditional look. And if you look at all our work, that's really what we do. So we're very open to going back in and taking a look at that. I think given the basic planning that we have a series of buildings. There's one building that's the training room, another that's the quarters, another that's the bays. We have a tower. I think there are lots of different ways that we can treat those in terms of massing and materials so that we can do something that's going to be appropriate for the downtown. It will be a signature building in the downtown. It's going to be part of what will kind of define, I think, what people think about when they think about Northborough. It's, like all public buildings, people think about those. That's part of what the town is. So it's important to get that right. And we certainly want to have public input into the process. That's really part of what we do. Having specialized in public work for as long as we have, I would say we have a very collaborative working style. We like to look at as many options as we can and come in and get feedback, because we may know how the building ought to go together, but you know your community and you know what's going to be appropriate for your community. We want to make it right for you. So we really do need that process, that back and forth, to make sure that we get it right for you. We had put a preliminary schedule into the proposal. I don't really need to go through this in too much detail, but the idea was to be able to go to a town meeting in April with a number so that you could get construction funding for it. I think that is doable. We've lost about a month up here, so we're going to squeeze things down a little bit. But basically, the approach is the blue up here is really, we have about 3 months, 2.5 to 3 months for schematic design, and that's really to get community input, look at the designs again, have some back and forth meetings with you, and I think importantly we need to do an updated cost estimate, because obviously, as I'm sure you're aware, costs have gone way up since the study was done. So we want to, I think up front, it's important to know where we think we're headed with the project. So all that would happen up front. Following that, we get into the design development phase, and that's really working out all the technical details. So all the building systems in more detail, structural systems, figuring out exactly what materials we're going to use, how they're going to be detailed, all of those kind of more detailed things. Site planning, those issues. And that would take, we're planning on doing that over a period of about 3 months or so. Again, we do another cost estimate down in there because we want to have a check at that point. And then we move into construction documents. and do another estimate when we're, say, maybe 75% along on construction documents as a check. That gives us a chance that if we need to make some modifications before it's done, we still have time to do that. We usually would structure our construction documents in such a way that we'd have a number of add alternates, so that we want to make sure you get as much building as you can for the appropriation that you have. So we'd have a kind of basic scope would be part of the basic bid package, and then there might be a number of other things that are would be easy to add on to the project should the bidding come in and be favorable. So that's how we would structure things. At this point, under this scenario, we'd be going to that town meeting in April with an estimate. And then following that, we'd be moving into a bid phase where we'd be bidding the project and get hard bids on the project. So
Madam
that's...
Chair, could I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I'm curious as to why you're proposing to do the construction documents prior to going to town meeting, where the town has to approve the design.
We could certainly do it the other way around. The advantage of doing it this way is we're trying to get the construction start moved up because it saves money. Now, I would, if the first time the town has seen the design is April, I'll tell you, we haven't done our job. We really need to make sure we have outreach, plenty of information sessions. We did one here before we went to town meeting before. We want to have some more. I probably should have put more dots down in here, but we really would expect that we're going to have plenty of town meeting or a public forum so people can come in and we can get input and reactions, because we certainly don't want anybody to be surprised when we go to town meeting. I think the public forums are very important. Usually we tend to get supporters out, but it's also good to get people who might be opposed to the project, because you can find out exactly what the issues are. Public forums, well, when we design, we try to do a whole range of options. Because you get in a public forum and somebody will ask, well, why didn't you do it differently? Why didn't you build it upside down or whatever? And if you've looked at a whole range of options, you should have answers for those things. And a lot of what we're doing when we're working with our building committees and with the larger community is we're trying to build consensus for what the right direction is. So I would expect that we'd be building that consensus all the way along before we get to the town meeting.
So how many public meetings are you proposing?
We would really leave that up to you. You tell us what you think is appropriate. We think we need at least a couple up here in this initial phase, because that's really going to determine the direction of the project. And then we probably need to have maybe we want to do another one down in DD and maybe one or two down in the construction documents phase. But we'll leave that to you. We see our job, it's not just to hand you a set of documents. It's to do whatever we can to help you make the project a reality. So we've done all kinds of things. We've done electronic media. We've done 3D models, fly-throughs, interior, exterior. We've done public presentations. We've done cable TV programs. I did one program where I went into public schools and presented a library and that was to get kids excited so they go home and talk to their kids. So we kind of look to you to tell us what's appropriate for your community, but we are really happy to do anything that needs to be done to help promote the project.
Any more questions? Chief?
I know you're familiar with the hot room and cold zone. We talked about that a lot. What we didn't talk about was the mental health aspects. Is that something you guys have worked with? So places for firefighters to have downtime where they can not be locked in a box and stare at the wall.
Yeah. That's a good point. We'd be happy to explore that with you. We recently just did a proposal for a facility that was actually a counseling facility for first responders who'd been through traumatic issues and needed to have some counseling. And that certainly was very heavy on that kind of thing.
Well, not just a proposal, we went through the beginning of construction documents. So it's a wonderful thing that you bring up. It doesn't get talked about a lot. And it needs to, just like when we were just working with you in 2018, 2019, Healthy In, Healthy Out was something that not many people were talking about.
So,
and this is
along with cancer, Jeff, is suicide is huge.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And a lot of that is because of the inability, not the inability, the fire service's tradition of suck it up and get along.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And we've gotten much, much better at that, but which is something we need to consider, I think, with the new station coming along.
Yeah.
How important that would be. How does your schedule look? When I mean your schedule, you guys have a lot of projects? You're not a huge corporation, so. You what I mean, you got 14 people.
We have 14 people, and
do you have the time to do our project?
Absolutely. We actually have turned down a couple things that have come along recently because we're hoping you will select us. So we've been trying to keep a slot open for you guys because your project is important to us.
Anyone else?
What do you consider the top 3 critical success factors for this project based on your knowledge of it and what we intend to do?
Well, I would say, number one is to do a plan that's going to meet your needs. That's number one. If we don't do that, there's no point in any of this. Number two, I think in this climate, it's having a good process to produce the documents for bidding so that we have a good set of documents and we're not going to get hit with a lot of change orders later on. I would say our office has a great reputation for low percentages of change orders. Our average change order is under 1% if you look at all our projects.
These chairs for wood, I'm not getting it.
I can't promise anything, but that's been the track record because we only do public work and we understand it. We know that that's important. So that's important. Number two. Number three, I think in this climate, it's going to be budget. It's going to be estimating and budget because prices have just been all over the place. And there's a kind of funny bidding climate right now where we're seeing fewer and fewer people bidding things. So that's going to be a big issue. And so we'll want to talk about that with your OPM and figure out the best strategy. But we take the cost estimating part of it very, very seriously.
Stu, when we talked before, supply chain never came into our conversation. That's an issue now.
Yes, it is.
How do you guys deal with supply chain issues?
Well, the supply chain stuff for the most part falls on the general contractor. But I can tell you, we got an email last week that had been put together by a general contractor that was forwarded to us by one of the colleges we're working for that had current lead times for all kinds of building systems. And there are certain things that are way out there, other things that aren't so bad. So the best thing we can do is once we have a contractor on board, is to have some discussions with them about ordering things early and making sure that they've allowed sufficient time for things. I can't remember what some of the long lead time
It's not 2021 anymore, but it still is a concern, and there's only so much we can do. And I think critical success factors, 3's tough. The big overriding one that kind of sums up what Stu talked about, was a process that's going to guarantee to the greatest extent possible success. And that process includes enough time, but not too much time, to make decisions and making the right decisions. Because some of the systems in this house, we don't want to do something that might just be readily available in 20 weeks. We may have a system that's 62 weeks out, and that's just the way it is. But working with the OPM pre-design, if there's any chance, I don't know if you guys have considered 149A. I don't know if the state would give a waiver for CM at risk. That's certainly, from our recent experience, the best way we can help you make good decisions about the availability of materials. And you probably all know what 149A is, but bringing a construct partner on board during design. Invaluable in some cases, really invaluable during rehabilitations, because that's from a scheduling, from a timing point of view. But a case could be made to the IG's office that, this is important. You might want some kind of early intervention on that.
The only other question I have or comment is, as you know, and you made the comment already, so here's about the way the station looks. And that it was a conceptual thing. Of course, there was a lot of concern about the way the building looked and it went in. As we spoke before, how you have to make functionality as well as make it pretty and still come in with a decent budget.
Yeah.
Is that possible?
Oh, I think it's possible, yeah.
Define decent budget.
Yes,
not to overspeak, but I mean, this is a very real thing that, Stu talked about 3 estimates. Really important to get a level of expectation as to what this is looking at. Because, and making informed decisions, what is the maximum funding that the town's going to consider? Because we may need to look and work backwards a little bit.
So I would say none of the other stations that you saw that are, have traditional designs were in communities that had unlimited budgets. Those were all done trying to do things in a cost-effective way and using materials and systems that were going to have a long life and be durable, but still were affordable. So.
Thank you.
Could you give us a little insight into sustainability, energy modeling, lead design, net zero?
Yes, I'm actually glad that you brought that up. We understand you are a stretch code community, so we will need to comply with the stretch code, which is going to require a bunch of hoops that we wouldn't have gone through before. We do have Thompson Thornacetti on board as sustainability consultants to do energy modeling to help us with that, and that'll be a fairly significant piece of it. We've done a number of projects that are LEED certified. We've done a few other things. I'll tell you, I built myself a house up in Maine during the pandemic, and it was in the Boston Globe last Sunday. It's a net zero house. If you want to, you can read about that. But we're very committed to it. Michael heads up our sustainability in the office. We've signed on to the AIA 2030 program, and we were one of 2 firms that
17, but
17
in the whole country.
Yeah, in the whole country, yeah.
National.
But
that met goals. So we take
sustainability might not be a critical success factor, but I think it's certainly going to be a guiding principle. And that's, again, starting right. Taking the time to make informed decisions about the process, not getting ahead of ourselves, but making informed decisions, set up a framework for making the decisions that we want.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Why Thornton City and not GGD doing that?
Oh, because we've done stuff with GGD for a long time, and
Well, GGD is doing modeling, but Thornton Tomasetti's giving the overriding. They're in charge of everything. GGD is going to be doing some technical work, but that's not what they do.
That's based on what you're saying.
Yeah, GGD, they are, Stu and I have worked with members of GGD since the 70s.
Oh, I'm not, I'm not questioning.
That's not their core.
I'm just trying to understand where Thomas City's role.
My take is that when GGD does energy modeling, they're really focused on what the building systems are going to be. When Thornton Tomasetti does it, they're focused on the whole building envelope and how the building envelope is going to perform. That's really the difference between those two. Yeah.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Okay, thank you.
You'll know by the end of the week we'll get you off.
Okay, great. We obviously would love to be able to help you. We'd love to be able to finish what we started. So we're delighted to be here.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. What was that? Oh, I will. You know Steph?
Just left the station, coming outside the station, they told me. So I just went straight in there, and Pat, the commandant, was coming the other way. He's going to call it in. Hey, Kat? The older woman that was transported in.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So is this also broadcast our discussion, or are we offline now?
No.
Do you want to do that?
See where that happened.
You could have a power failure.
Time for deliberations and selection of design firm. Input.
Can I ask a procedural question?
Oh, yeah.
Are we going to rank by points, so we'll rank 1, 2, 3?
Maybe we discuss it first.
Or, no, I know, at the end of the discussion, though.
I think we just pick, right?
I think we just could.
I don't think it's going to be that simple. I think our OPM can advise on how we can ultimately resolve that, but
Well, as far as how are you ranking it, like, are you doing like a, if you were rank them 1, 2, 3, they go to the lowest number, or are you going to say the one with the most, number 1 goes to the most? So there are different ways to, how you, so, but I think having a discussion and see if there is kind of just a general consensus before taking that next step on how you're going to rank it.
Yeah, I don't think at this point we need to rank them. I think for us to discuss it, there's consensus, seems to be overwhelming. 10 to 1. So, Matt, would you like to start?
No, I wouldn't actually, because, and let me be very honest, because I had a lot of interaction with Johnson Roberts on these feasibility. None of the other members, except for Captain Grohart, had an interaction. So I'd like to hear what they have to say as opposed to me covering something one way or the other. If that's okay.
Well, I have to say that when I read the proposals, I did not think that HKT's was the strongest proposal, but I thought for a lot of reasons their interview was the strongest. I have lots of reasons for that, but I thought that their site discussion was better. I thought their design approach was very thoughtful because they obviously acknowledged that you had worked through a plan very carefully and they were trying to work with that. But at the same time, we're obviously willing to change that as needed.
As opposed to throwing it out to start with.
And to go back to the big topic in town, which is architecturally, what is this thing going to look like? You have 6 bays. Like, it's very hard to do this architecturally in a way that's going to be sensitive to the town context. I thought that their solution was really nice in that way because they broke that down into sort of 3 larger bays, and they let all of that northern light into that space. So anyway, I liked, despite the fact that it is a more residential vocabulary, I think that tower gives it a real civic presence. So I just felt like it was a better design concept. They also acknowledged, and this was one of the things that I was struggling with context, it is a little tricky to have the way that the gables were oriented on the context scheme. You already have to make the bays really high. Mm-hmm. So you're actually, depending on the orientation of the gable, you're making it less efficient if it runs the direction that they had shown it. So anyway, I thought architecturally they did a great job. And I thought it was great that we actually got to meet the mechanical engineer because that mechanical engineer is definitely doing the job since they're on all 3 proposals. And I appreciate that they brought them. So I think those are my big points. I mean, I think any of these firms could obviously design a firehouse. They're all around the same size firm, so I think capacity is going to be pretty similar with them. Yeah, I'll let other people talk.
John?
Well, I would agree with Diana that either of the 3 have the capabilities to do this. They've been there, they've done this before. They came up with some conceptual designs. It sounds like they're not married to them. And needless to say, if they came in with design 1, we may not wind up with that anyway, relative to feedback. Sounds like they're all flexible relative to working with the community, working with us, and delivering a quality project. Some differences in their Gantt charts here. Their context is 38 weeks from task 1 through schematics. Johnson Roberts is 24 weeks for the same thing, and HKT is 32. So there's a bit of a difference in there. And I don't know if the fact that Johnson Roberts did the prior study in 2019, if that gives them a leg up on some stuff or not.
I think
Clearly, they have to revisit.
Squeeze in CDs.
Yeah, clearly they've got to revisit the requirements, as would anybody, in my opinion. So that's going to be important. But context, I like their presentation. I like their approach. And all 3 have the concept of healthy and healthy out, and segmenting the hot zones from the administration, et cetera. So they get that. my favorite hot button, needless to say, is, what do you consider critical success factors? And if you can't articulate that correctly, you're off the list. And they all came in with, the site, the design, the architecture, working with the community, collaboration, et cetera. So they're all kind of in the same church and pew.
I think that's a great question, though. I'm glad you asked that.
Yep, thank you.
Tom?
So my preferences followed the way they presented. So I thought context, HKT, and then Johnson Roberts in that order. And the reason why I liked context better, the emphasis on sustainability, they understand the healthful requirements for a fire station, the fact that they've done 28 fire stations, and the quality of their building design was excellent throughout. Variety of styles, contexts, so forth. I didn't think their presentation was as strong as the other two. I really liked the sketches done by HKT. But I felt, well, I did talk to Captain Purcell in Westboro, who's dealt with the context, and he said that all the fire chiefs that he's spoken with that have worked with him all gave him glowing recommendations. They're very straightforward, honest, and very competent. So that's where I'm leaning now, towards context.
Dan?
I think, as everyone said, all three firms are all good firms, all good presentations. Like the chief had mentioned, dealing with Johnson Roberts years ago, they were very easy to work with. They went about our needs. We got the site, and then we got the house above for the extra site to make it easier and give us more options. I think they do have a leg up as far as knowing what our needs are. I think they did a great plan. I think the conceptual drawing, or the conceptual that they provided in the beginning has given some difficulty because people have latched onto that picture. And so I think all three firms would be great, and I would be comfortable with all three. So I would think I'd leave it up to the architects that we have here and everything.
Cop out. Cop out.
Chief?
I like the blue one.
I do like the clock tower, I'm not gonna lie.
Oh,
Yeah, I knew you would. So I came in with a preconceived concept after going through these, that Johnson Roberts was going to come out number one, mainly because I think they stuck closest to the RFQ. Their product that they turned back in followed it exactly. Okay, as opposed to the other ones, they weren't terrible, but they didn't follow exactly what was put down. I also agree with Captain Burlhart. He says, Stu was great. Stu and Jeff were both great to work with. They were both, they were very flexible. Now, I'm not going to say anything bad about architects because I can get in trouble. But they didn't come in and say, this is the way it's going to be. Presentation-wise.
They did or they didn't?
They didn't.
Okay.
They came in and they would say, well, what do you think about this? And I'd say, well, we really need this instead. Okay, not a problem. Let's take a look at this, right? So they really looked at our programmatic needs really closely. Presentation-wise, I didn't like their presentation anywhere near what I liked. Surprisingly, was HKT, to be honest with you. I really didn't think I would like their presentation. And so I was kind of caught off by that. Context was okay, but I wouldn't put them number one. I would put HKT number one right now. And I liked their emphasis. And again, maybe they just knew the right words to say, but I like their emphasis on the firefighting, not only physical health, but on the mental health, and on how important the design of the station is to that concept. How they went about with they didn't suggest going late. I got a feeling from context that, hey, if we don't get it done, we'll just go for a special town meeting. I can tell you, no offense, guys, I want to stay the hell away from a special town meeting, if we can. Because when you go to a special town meeting with a one-topic meeting, I don't want that to be my topic. It could be something else. So And obviously, I think Johnson & Roberts would do a great job, I really do. The fact that they did this study for the city of Boston that has been adopted is great. It shows that they really have the concept of that healthy in, healthy out. The fact that they've done repeat business for the same departments, right? They did Cambridge and then went back to Cambridge. They did Com and then went back to Com, right? Those are really big things. So I don't write them off either. I would just, presentation-wise, I thought HKT did a better job. What do you think?
Well, I was surprised at HKT only because I had written a mock after I read it. And they did do a nice job. Context, I thought did a great presentation. But there's some concerns on if they're,
Well, what I've heard is that they're busy. You know, and I think, you know, maybe it could be a follow-up question and just confirming your availability. Your team that you brought to interview tonight is who we're going to have, and that they'll have the capacity to do that. And I'm sure they could provide a workload staffing matrix if we ask for that. For what it's worth, I also wasn't high going in after reading them of HKT. Context, it looked like they had a ton of experience, and they obviously do, and I thought they did a nice presentation. But HKT, what I latched onto was just thinking about it not just for this is what the space I need for the truck, but thinking about our natural light and just kind of just a more maybe a broader thought process. But I think Context talked about the geothermal, which I think is the future.
Can I just say though, I'm not really refuting what you said, but I thought it was interesting the various responses about sustainability. None of that was ever asked for in the RFP. So, and I think that's exactly why Johnson Roberts didn't talk about it. To your point, that they were following exactly the requirements of the RFP.
As a fire chief, I'm looking at it.
So in my like very
check.
strict, designer selection brain, you respond to, exactly what's listed. And if you talk about something at the interview that's not there, like it's technically not part of our criteria. So I agree with you, geothermal is probably the way to go. But I have a little trouble with considering like how we accommodate that as a factor. If you look at the criteria that's based on our RFP.
Yeah, and honestly, it happens to us all the time. You go in with trying to respond to what you think is important, and somebody just off the cuff says something at an interview, and all of a sudden they got the job. And so it is tough, and you have to technically have to go by your scoring criteria that you've established of how you're going to be selecting these folks. I think, and I didn't really talk about it, but Johnson Roberts, obviously, they have the experience. They did the studies on fire station design. So I think all three could, as everybody else has said. But I think what you have to try and do is think about, well, what's separating one from the other, and it's maybe not what they all can do, but what may be something that somebody focused on and really emphasized. And maybe it is really the question that you asked about what are your three concerns, or what are your three topics. As an OPM, when we're being interviewed, that's kind of like one of my go-to questions to ask the committee. What are your concerns? So that I can hear right away. What are the concerns of the people who live here and really understand the scope of the project? Site, obviously, I think that the context talking about sight lines to the building, and not that they all can't work through that, but I don't know. I thought some of their responses were good.
So can you work with all, as the OPM, you have to work with?
Yeah, we could work with all of them. I honestly, I don't remember if context was similar. Were they similar in size to the?
They're all around the
14, 20,
20 people.
But I did, just thinking about capacity though.
They proposed a team of 14.
I felt, it was interesting that Johnson Roberts was turning down work in anticipation of this project. But HKT does have a big project finishing, and we happen to know that because it's regional. And I don't know, like, I'm sort of split about whether or not it's worth asking a firm about their capacity, because if they want the job, they want the job.
They're going to tell you.
They're just going to tell you what you want to hear. Yes, of course we're available.
We got plenty of DPW guys, I'll build the building.
How much of our needs are focused on the ability to get to a town meeting in 2024? Not a special one, but the scheduled town meeting. And which of these three can help us get there? To your comment earlier, Chief.
I want to get to the town meeting in 2020.
I understand.
I agree with Chief. Having a standalone special town meeting is more likely to bring out opponents who are there for one reason, as opposed to the general population who want a fire station.
Yep.
That's one thing I can say about Johnson Roberts. I think they can get us there a lot faster.
Although,
What about
but
you, Scott? What are your thoughts?
HTK surprised me based on their proposal. I didn't expect to be so receptive of them. They have a nice envelope thoughts, which was great. They emphasized pieces that if it was a DSP we wouldn't be able to consider, but leads and sustainability, and having struggled through permit changes or code changes during the design phase, they kind of outlined that on how do we insulate it like this. Their civil piece, power engineering, is critical, not necessarily for a sight line, like I said, Phil, anybody can see down the road. We're going to need a signal there, I'm thinking.
Oh,
and it's going to have to be coordinated with Church Street.
There'll be an opticon control signal there on both sides. It has to be.
Yep, and they'll be tied in, and working with Mass DOT to do that is a struggle. I know PAR does a lot of work with Mass DOT. They're in the SHAPS program. They have relationships with the signal division there, which gains a lot of ground for us, especially when it comes to getting a schedule together. You need to have those permits in hand before you go to town meeting, and DOT can be the massive brakes on a project very, very easily if you upset the wrong person.
Sales prevention
So
team.
that's a value added. Contact, great experience, and well prepared. They have a lot of subs. They seem to break up. I don't know if they had an M and an E and a P, but it just seemed like a huge team. And to Phil's comment, if they have a lot of work, and they're spread thin, how do you coordinate 12 subs? If you're stretched thin already, things fall through the cracks. That's how you have, I don't want to say errors and omissions, but that's how you have interdisciplinary coordination issues during construction. And then you get a lot of this, which ends up like this.
Yeah.
Which worries me. Roberts, I liked his, I'm a civil engineer. My meat and potatoes are based on bidding, change orders, thorough construction documents, and accuracy. Low change order percentages, and discussing the bidding process during the interview was nice, because that's how you put a construction bid package together, get on the street, get construction done. That's where things fall apart horribly. They didn't really bring out the whole community input, bringing people together. I expected Roberts to do more of that because they saw what we went through.
He actually did, and he actually did do it, right?
Yeah, and he went through it with the renderings.
Yeah.
Again, I'm a civil engineer. I was surprised that they all came with these renderings. It just seems like a dangerous risk when you go to interview on something that's a feasible.
I was surprised too that they brought design ideas, but
It was nice to see, but HDK or Context didn't have a single host tower. HTK had nothing but
I
those
didn't
towers.
notice that. I was going to comment.
Like, those are big risks that you, all of a sudden what is reviewing a firm becomes reviewing the design. Well, we're not here to review the designs.
well, but I think it can give you a window into how they work.
Mm-hmm.
So that there's value in that, and I
Yeah.
feel like well, again talking about HKT, like theirs built upon the work that's been done, and I felt like Context was not really thinking about, because you put in a lot of work to
I
get
thought,
to that.
I thought Context was looking at, we'll fix what happened before, we'll just move it.
Yeah, there's a lot of diversity in
Sean?
HDK's presentation.
So for me, coming in, I had, just from reading the proposals, I had Johnson Roberts first, then Context and HKT were kind of like right there, but I think HKT's presentation was the best because they approached and touched on everything that the community is looking for. They're reinventing the design without changing it. I liked the whole natural light concept, thinking, like you had mentioned, Chief, about not only the firefighters' physical health, but their mental health, and really exploring options for just different uses, like being able to catch the rainwater, or doing the garden roofs, and just having a really open idea to what you can do. There are 3 different designs I thought were great spin-offs from the original renderings from Johnson Roberts. Context, I think, had a great presentation as well, but I don't think they really understand what the community is looking for. It felt like they were really hung up on making it look like houses in the neighborhood. Even though we tried to explain to them that's not what we're really looking for, they kept going back to the scale and the size of the materials used on the exterior of the building. And Johnson Roberts, I just feel like they almost came in like they were expecting to get the job. I don't think their presentation really addressed what has changed in the 5 or 6 years since they completed this.
And in defense of them, I can tell you the original feasibility stated that if we were happy with it, they could just continue on.
Yeah.
But because of the big break, things changed. Can I ask you guys, some of you were concerned about the construction documents being done early. I don't know anything
That
about
was a
fire
really
chief.
good question.
Yeah,
Can you explain that to me?
well, there's a big expense to preparing construction drawings before your town has approved the building design
It's a
in the
huge
budget.
risk.
Big risk, big financial risk. It's highly unusual in my
It's a big
experience.
risk on the consultant side to go to a town meeting with a budget that's based on 50% TDs. That's, you know, as a consultant, I would always want to, not necessarily do the construction specs, but my drawings should be 90% when I go to my town meeting with my estimate, because it's based on real tight design documents. It gets approved, great, I'm going to push out my specs. I'm going to get everything, the front end done. Otherwise, I get some big 25% contingency in it, and then I'm getting beat up at the microphone. Why 25%? The article gets changed, and now I got to go backwards and convince the
But what do
committee.
you do though if you go to town, like if you're at 90% and you get an estimate on your CDs, and you're like on the context schedule, they had the town meeting backing right up to that. If you're over budget at that point, you can't even go to town meeting.
Right.
So that's why it didn't make sense to me, is that you could just blow the whole project.
And each of the 3 of them had like 22 weeks for construction documents. That whole process, 22 weeks.
And you're going to have 2 or 3 cost estimate exercises before you start your construction drawings. So you're going to be pretty close, I would think, 5 to 10% if the economy doesn't go crazy.
But you're also doing a reconciled estimate, right?
Yeah, so for instance, Johnson Roberts had PNC, I believe, as their cost consultant. So we would bring in, a secondary cost estimator. And you go through, and really, you're not necessarily, cost estimators, conservative by nature, they want to be in the middle of the pack as far as the bids go. They're not going to, try and estimate to a low number. But really, when you're bringing these 2 together, you just want to make sure they're looking at the same project. Okay, how many square feet? Did you have this at 4 inches or 8 inches or 6 inches? What was your slab thickness in the bays? Or, just so that apples to apples, at least the scope is the same. They may not 100% agree on cost, but it should, that back and forth discussion should really ferret out a lot of scope issues, and then you can kind of get to within a few percentage points on what the cost is. So if it was, one guy's at 21 million, one guy's at 19.5 or something, so we can say, okay, well, that's the range where we're expecting it to come in. And then you're right, you have a design contingency that you carry throughout. As you go further through the design process, that'll shrink. But in the beginning, it's going to be a huge design contingency, because you need certain things, but they're not drawing it. So the estimators are assuming what there needs to be and putting a value to it, or at least a percentage to it. You do need time in case your estimates aren't tracking the right way. Hopefully, if you're doing it at coming out of DD and then you're doing it at 50% construction documents, that okay, you're tracking in the right direction so that that final estimate will be right on, and then you can go into, into town meeting. But if you don't, yeah, it's a major concern. I mean, we had a crazy year, where everything's just, we were in the pandemic and things were okay. They weren't really going crazy. I think people were looking to have cash flow. They were bidding low. They just needed work coming in the door. But then all of a sudden, things just went crazy. And every school in the state is facing those problems with the MSBA. I'm trying, because they lock in those pricing after the design development and schematic design and get their funding agreement. So yeah, also the architecture fee for the most part is heavily weighted into the construction documents, not the contract administration. So if you're going to have them design all that and then go to town meeting and then it doesn't get approved, you spend a lot of money on a nice set of drawings that are going to sit somewhere.
I'll probably look at my wounds. That happened to me at town meeting, in a highway garage.
It's rough.
Yeah, I went in with 50% design and had a 20% contingency. I left with a 5%.
But I think they'd all be able to adjust to whatever schedule you said, look, we have to hit this standing town meeting. And this is what we're going to need. And they could adjust their schedules to meet that.
But I think if you're in that position again, you actually have a huge rationale to have a very high contingency right now because the market is crazy. But also, and this came up in one of the teams mentioned this, a lot of trades don't have many people bidding. I mean, I've had a bid come in on a $25 million project, one electrical bid. It's a huge piece of your after total cost, and if you don't have anywhere to go with it. So you'd be totally legit if you said we need a huge contingency at this point just to protect the town's ability to make the project happen.
Yeah, I don't think that this is necessarily a CM at risk project. It does offer advantages, and that's something that you would discuss probably further down the road. But one of those is pre-purchase of equipment. Not that you couldn't do that. You just have to really have the design team zero in on exactly what they were purchasing. And that's really a switchgear, emergency generator, maybe some specialized HVAC equipment.
Yeah, we've got those generators and switchgear before.
You bought them, like the town has bought them.
The town buys them in advance. We're a source well provider, so we can buy Kohler equipment directly from Kohler. And you get like an 18% discount or whatever.
Yeah,
we do that all. Yeah, switchgear, same thing. Yeah.
There's a year of lead time.
So if I was to rank them, does anybody else have any other discussion they want to put in? So if I was to rank them, surprisingly, I'm actually going to say I would put HKT first. And I'm just kind of surprised by that. The other two, just because of my familiarity with Stu and knowing how they work, I would rank them next and then context lens. Not that I don't think context is bad. It's just because of my familiarity.
Are you comfortable making a motion?
Well, do you want me to do that, or do you want to hear what everyone else thinks? Do you want to rate
I'd
that?
rather just have a motion and everybody can make a decision that way.
Yeah, so, okay, I'll make a motion that we choose HKT as the architect to move forward with our fire station.
I'll second that.
All those in favor? Motion carries.
Okay.
They'll be good.
Excellent.
I don't mind telling you, I can't say enough, I'm surprised by it. So, really, because I didn't like necessarily their product, but I like what they had to say. So, what is our process?
Tom, you did not vote for it.
I voted for context.
Okay. Just for the notes.
The process next would be just to notify them and then we negotiate or
Yep.
notify them.
We'll notify them, all three firms that HDK was selected. We'll go through a scope development with the OPM and start working out the scope and the task fees. And then
Do we need to schedule anything while we're all here, Scott? Or is it, would that be premature?
It's probably a little premature.
I figured it was, but I wanted to
I know
ask.
Mitch's schedule's pretty tight as well. And this process could take a month. I mean, it took us for the OPM solid 6 weeks.
That's because they're a pain in the
That's
butt,
so
so.
cute.
Yeah, I know, the OPMs are brutal to work with.
I know, I hate them.
Will you be able to do that tomorrow, by then, if they know?
Yep.
Okay, any other
Motion to adjourn.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
We need to put this stuff away.